What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday, and welcome to episode 14 of the ERCast, your weekly Friday Night Magic pre-show. I'm your co-host, Corey, and with me this week, as always, is none other than the man who controls Clark's other thumb, Cole.
Hey Corey, happy to be here. How's it going?
It's going. I will say that I am excited to be here. It's been 2 weeks in a row now that we have finally gotten episodes out, so a trend has begun, maybe, perhaps.
Consistency is key.
This week, you guys, Cole, I'm going to take a step back, and Cole is going to be ranking every single keyword in Magic alphabetically, but also in a tier list.
Prepare yourself. It's a long, long list.
We're starting with Absorb and ending with Zorb. I don't know what the last one would be.
I can get it for you. I'll pull it up.
No, it's all good. But this week, guys, what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be looking at some keywords that we feel should get a little more love, a little more attention, whether that's through Wizards printing more cards or whether that's just through you guys implementing them into your decks a little bit more. So we've each selected 4 keywords, and we're going to break it down why we love them, why we think there should be a little more attention put on them, and hopefully why we see them in the very next set. These are all obviously auto-includes an Ixalan, I think.
Well, hey Corey, I just want to get back to you. I would tell you what the last word is alphabetically, but it seems it's already on our list.
Of course, it's Zorb. Zorb, that classic classic keyword. Um so before we jump into our 4 keywords, we do have a couple honorable mentions. These are ones that did not quite make the cut, but still should see some love down the line. We're just not going to talk about them so much. Cole, quick list. What's your honorable mentions that you did not quite put on this list?
Well, there were so many fun options on the keyword abilities list. I had to kind of narrow it down. I only have one honorable mention, and it's Extort. It's a bit of a rare card in the sense that it only has 14 cards with Extort, but it's a great win con and a lot of different decks. It basically says whenever you cast a spell, you may pay a white or a black, and if you do, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain that much life. There was a whole controversy about whether or not hybrid mana should count for your color identity, but you can put it in a mono black deck, you can put it in a mono white deck, even though the mana symbol is there. A really relevant card with Extort is Pontiff of Blight. It's 2 black and 4 mana. It has Extort and it gives other creatures Extort. It's basically just a great outlet to pump some black mana into and win you the game off of a couple spells.
I think that's a great choice. Pawn of Blight is pretty cool. I also have a lot of experience with Cryptghast, which is kind of similar. So it's a mono black that has Extort, and then also has whenever you tap a swamp, you get like an extra black mana out of it.
Yeah, who would ever want an extra black mana
Yeah.
whenever you have a swamp?
Ugh. Mono black ramp. Ugh. Um, I also had a couple. I went and I think I put Amplify down as mine. So Amplify is a cool little counter mechanic that you don't see too much. So usually it'll say like Amplify 3 is probably the most common one you see for Killmouth Dragon. But it's essentially you put it out, whatever the number is going to enter the battlefield with that many counters on it for each card you show from your hand that has the same creature type. So Killmouth Dragon is a dragon, obviously. It's got Amplify 3, so when you play it out, you reveal however many dragons you want from your hand. And for each dragon, it comes in with 3 1/1 counters, but they've got it for other things, soldiers and goblins and stuff like that. But I think it's
Zombies
just a
too.
cool, yeah, zombies too. I think it's just a cool kind of counter ability, and also it works a lot with like creature type decks, which obviously are very prevalent in Commander.
I have a red dragon deck that Killmouth Dragon might just find a slot in. That sounds like a really strong ability.
Oh yeah, that card actually is pretty cool, especially if you're running a mono red. I'm assuming you're talking about Lathless. We talking Lathless?
Well, I have a Lathless deck that is mono red dragons, but I've changed the commander to the Dragon. I know it's crazy, but I produce a lot of treasures, and so I'm able to cast the my Wooburg commander only using mountains and supplementary treasures. So
Okay.
Killmouth Dragon, he's going right in there.
Yeah, it's super cool too, because then you can tap him and deal damage to like creatures and players equal to the number of counters on it. So it's super beneficial. Bring it out. Even if you show one dragon from your hand, you already have what, an 8/8, I want to say. Yeah, because he's a 5/5, so you'd have an 8/8 that deals 3 damage by tapping it.
He's a lightning bolt on a stick at that point.
There you go. Other honorable mention for me, I kind of like the idea of ingest, which is kind of like Annihilator, but not as ruthless in that it's when it deals combat damage, you exile the top card of that person's library, as opposed to, you know, hey, you start making tough choices on if you're destroying your lands or not.
Apples and oranges, Corey. Exiling a card off the top is a million times better than having to sacrifice one of my lands.
Eh, Hey, hey, hey. We talked about our love for Turgrid last week, so now, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about our love for Turgrid. So now you can talk about sacrificing lands. But let's jump into the meaty thickness of our list. And we're going to be starting off with, I believe, one of my own. That is Casualty. So Casualty, we'll run through what the abilities do and all that good stuff. So Casualty, all these cards will say Casualty and then a number or X, I believe, is on like one of them. And what happens is when you cast the spell, you can sacrifice a creature with that much power equal to the casualty number, and if you do, you copy the spell. So it's super cool. You can play cards like Cut Your Losses is a pretty prevalent one. Most of them will say Casualty 1, Casualty 2. So you would cast your spell, sacrifice a 2 power or greater creature, and then you automatically get the copy on the stack.
The copy is then going to resolve first, and it's
Mhm.
really strong against counter spells because there's two spells now that have to be countered. You're pretty much getting what you want when you cast something with casualty.
Yeah, it's really fun. I've talked about it on the show a couple of times, and I'm Nicole, you know better than anybody else, but my go-to deck is in Hello the Painter,
I
who
do know.
gives yeah, who his ability is that he gives the first instant sorcerer you cast each turn casualty to. So you just cast things in Grixis colors. Um, Getting a 2 power thing in Grixis colors isn't that hard because guess what? 2/2 zombies exist. So you get your 2/2 zombie, you sacrifice it, you start copying all kinds of spells that shouldn't be copied. And then you can also get interesting triggers off of this. Sacrificing creatures you can play into like your Blood Artist, Dictator Erebos, Butcher of Malakir kind of sacrifice loops if you want.
Now, I was looking at all of our keywords, and I did want to kind of talk a little bit about like they came out when they came out, which is a new Capenna. So this is a pretty new keyword. And then,
Sure.
interestingly enough, I mean, if you were playing during New Capenna, you remember the mob families, all of the names. You know, Corey knows them; he'll list them for you later. Uh, but this one is the Maestros, and all cards that say casualty fall under the Grixis color pie, which is blue, black, red. Now, that's only 16 cards, and that's on paper. There are two more cards, but they're arena or alchemy only. We're just going to be talking about cards that exist on paper, but they are all within the Grixis color pie. So you're not going to be seeing any casualty spells in green or white, maybe for a while.
Yeah, and I think that actually benefits it too because if you think about right now, what is a spell copying color, color deck? It's Grixis, it's Is It, which falls into Grixis, it's mono blue, it's things of that nature where you're going to have a lot of those copying effects. And then because you're copying as opposed to casting, you don't get cast triggers on the copies, but you do get triggers on things like Magecraft, which came out in Strixhaven. So things like your Stormkilled Artist that give you treasures every time you copy, your Archmage Emeritus that draws you a card every time you cast or copy. You can usually stack a casualty trigger along with like twinning staff and things of that nature and get 2 3 copies off of that one casualty sacrifice, and then have those magecraft triggers that also, pop off and get you 3 4 cards, get you 3 4 treasure.
And
I think it's a
it's
lot of
worth
fun.
stating that the casualty
Mhm.
it only triggers on copies. It doesn't trigger casts, isn't that
Right.
right?
Yeah, it doesn't trigger cast, which is why you want to focus on things that are like magecraft triggers, because they are when you cast or copy. I can see this coming back in future sets, but it's definitely more of a flavor piece. This isn't going to fall into like your flying first strike kind of area where you'll see it every set. But the reason I really wanted to talk about it is I think it's a fun variation on spell copying, because the mean version of this is Storm, right? Like, I cast this and I storm off because I cast 20 cantrips, and your life becomes miserable in a game of counting how many things were cast and how many copies you need to make, and that should trigger this, and and next thing you know, you're like sitting there 40 minutes while this person is with their abacus trying to figure out how many things they cast and copied.
Right. That's a mess.
um, but I like this. I also see design space, I think, going into the future where maybe instead of having like a number, if similar to like Ward, you know how Ward always started off with like Ward 2 and it was just a mana cost, but now we've got
Right.
wards that are discard a card, sacrifice a creature, stuff like that. I can almost see this being like casualty enchantment or casualty artifact or something like that, where you have to sacrifice a permanent in order to, like a non creature permanent in order to get certain copies.
Ward cost, Venmo me $20.
Go to askursa.com and you will find
No, I
your.
absolutely agree. I think they could do a lot with, maybe making cards that allow you, almost how with vehicles there are cards that will crew vehicles as though they had higher power. Casualty
Mm,
requires you to have creatures with power X or less. They could, probably find some easy low hanging fruit design space there, of kind of following in that same suit, making it easier to cast stuff with casualty.
yeah, and I think they've already kind of felt that out because Ob Nixilis, the adversary, exists, which is a casualty X, and the X is you can sacrifice any creature you want, and whatever its power is the starting loyalty of the copy of Ob Nixilis. So you make like a non-legendary Planeswalker version. The original comes in with 3 loyalty, and then if you were to say, I don't know, sacrifice your Emrakul because you're a madman like that, you're gonna have a massive Obnixilis entering the battlefield. I could see stuff like maybe there's an X spell in the future, and then it's X blue blue, do whatever effect, and the X is casualty X, so you sacrifice it, whatever that power is. Now X equals that, and you're just tapping it for blue blue and a creature to bring it out.
I think that sounds very reasonable. I could see that.
Yeah, and especially because we already have cards that do certain things like that, where they'll say, as a additional cost of this card, sacrifice a creature and then do blank that it was equal to that creature's mana value or power or toughness or whatever number they want to pull from.
It fits really well into the same realm as casualty. It's a power matters. Yeah, they could do a version of kind of a semi version of casualty that worries about toughness.
Mhm.
Most of the time that your power and toughness is the same, but there's spin-offs here. You could sacrifice creatures for your casualty effects using their toughness as if it were their power. That would what would be printed on the card.
You'll be interesting if there was a so casualty, like naming convention wise, is because you're sacrificing a creature. They're a casualty to the cause to advance your board state more or less, or advance your spell power. If there was one that was like hostage, where you sacrifice someone else's creature and it's just the monstrosity version of casualty.
Oh, yeah, that sounds a little mean. I don't know if I'm going to be playing too much against that.
That's casualty meets Turgid. Sacrifice the other person's board, and become obnoxious. Um, Next up, I believe, Cole, we're moving on to one of yours, which
Yeah.
is not casualty somehow. I don't know why we're not looking at casualty 8 times.
Well, this is a little less violent. This is a keyword I'm very fond of, but there are very few cards. It has only 12. I don't know if you can guess it from
Mhm.
that, but I'm going to guess no, because it is Hideaway. Now, Hideaway is similar to Casualty, as though it's a word printed, and then it has an X. Usually it's Hideaway 4. It's going to be whenever this permanent enters the battlefield, look at the top N or X cards of your library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of your library. Now, there's a land
It
cycle that has Hideaway. You're probably very familiar with them. It's going to be your, Mosswort Bridge,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And they have one for every color. There's only one creature. And then recently, in the streets of New Capenna, which is kind of coincidental that yours was from that same era, there was a set of 5 enchantments, each printed in one of the 5 colors that follow the theme of Hideaway, which is usually you hide away a card, you can play it after completing a certain set of circumstances. So for the land cycle, it comes in tapped, you tap it for a color, and then for instance with Mosswort Bridge, you're going to pay 1 green, and it allows you to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost, provided that you've complete the requirements, which are having a creature total creatures power toughness, power 10 or greater. Um,
Mhm.
this is a really cool ability because it allows you to fully negate timing restrictions and cast some, loopy spells when you shouldn't really be able to. You're casting sorceries at instant speed, artifacts. It's like you have flash, only for that one spell. Now, this came out in Lorwyn, uh, but I think that there's a lot of design space for them to come in now. I've thought of a couple of ideas that would allow, kind of enhance Hideaway. And if you were going to, bring it in a direction where you'd have a deck dedicated to Hideaway, you might have cards that would allow you to exile 2 cards while hiding away instead of just 1, or cards that say whenever you hide away, say you hide away 2, instead you hide away 4, meaning you're like doubling the amount of cards that you look at. Going a little bit more abstract, I even thought about cards that would allow you to cast cards that you own face down in exile. There are a few cards that do this, but like Hideaway is a big portion of those that are going to exile your cards face down and give you access to, this would be giving you access to cast them without meeting the requirements of your Hideaway cards.
Yeah, this is a cool ability in the sense that it's casting from exile, which has only gotten better, like better commanders and better support over time. I mean, when Aldheim first came out, everyone was like, what is this casting from exile? Why do I get benefits from it? But I mean, since then we've gotten Raynar, Vega the Watcher, which are more like Foretell based commanders. Prosper loves casting from exile, Faldorn. So all these things are technically coming out of exile, and I also really like that all the lands, whatever their threshold is to kind of surpass to get that card out, is usually pretty well flavor tied to the color. So when you think green, you're thinking big creatures. That's what Mosswort Bridge is tied to. I believe Spine Rock Knoll, the red one, is tied to damage dealt,
Yes, you're absolutely
or number
correct.
of creatures attacked or something like that.
7 damage
So it's like,
dealt to a opponent that turn. The other
mm,
ones
see,
are
so
in that same vein, now, but they're less popular in Commander because their abilities are a little bit harder to activate.
yeah. Now, I'll tell you exactly why this was out in Streets of New Capenna, by the way. So if you were a near miss casualty, you went and hid away. So you had to go into exile to avoid being sacrificed to duplicate spells, and then later, when you've achieved your journey in exile, you're welcomed back into the fold. That's clearly why it was there.
Just like the mob.
Yeah, yeah, these were little hideouts for the family.
My favorite hideaway card as of recently is a card called Fight Rigging. It has Hideaway 5. It's a green enchantment. It costs 3. And at the beginning of your combat on each turn, or on your turn, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. And if you control a creature with power 7 or greater, you get to cast the card you've hidden away. It's a great way to buff up your creatures slowly but surely. Typically, if you have a commander that's 4 mana or higher, you're able to cast this on curve and immediately start buffing your commander as soon as it comes out. And sometimes you get a crazy cast off of that hideaway, and it allows you to
Mhm.
take the game out in a direction that it was not anticipated.
Yeah, and I think fight rigging has uses outside of a hideaway ability too, because a lot of these things, like let's say the lands, once you get your hideaway spell out, whatever it is, then you just pretty much have a forest or a mountain or whatever sitting there. Whereas fight rigging still is giving you that 1/1 counter at the beginning of combat, and in green, let's be honest, hardened scales, doubling season, all these crazy other cards you could have out there that just love it when you go, here's one instance of me putting a 1/1 counter on something.
Well, hey, and I gotta say, while I'm simping for Hideaway, I think that the lands are super relevant. I put the lands in pretty much every deck that I can squeeze them into. That I don't care if
Mhm,
if I have tapped lands in. Obviously, if I'm trying to go faster, I might not want a tapped land. But the advantage that you get off of the Hideaway, with most of these effects being like pretty easy to achieve if you're in green, red, or white, it gets a little harder in
mhm.
black and blue. But then you play a bounce land. Oh my God, Corey, I get the chance to play Mossford Bridge 2 times. Sign me up. I'm a fan of the. It's an ETB effect, so some blinks, any blink that allows you to hit lands or anything that just returns a land to your hand. It kind of allows you to sift through the top of your deck and create some unexpected card advantage.
Mhm. These have definitely crept up, I think, on my radar for building decks in recent years. To the point where I won't say they're auto includes really for me, but they're just about auto includes. And if I get to monocolor, and like you said, if I'm in green, red, or white, this is pretty close to an auto include. If it's blue or black, I kind of have to look and see what the deck is trying to do. But when I go and I set my, especially monocolor commanders, when I'm setting my nice little 35 lands to set up on Moxfield, it's lands, and then, do I want that hideaway land? It's pretty much like 1 and 2.
Oh yeah. The hideaway. Try putting some hideaway cards into your decks. I guarantee you won't regret it. It's always fun when you reveal an unexpected, breach the multiverse or something to that effect.
Yeah, another nice thing, just real quick before we move on to the next one, these are great budget editions as well because they've popped up in a lot of precons recently. So especially the lands, there are a lot of precons that just have them in there. So it's easy. You're not breaking the bank. I want to say, if I had to guess, I'm not looking at numbers directly in front of me. If I had to guess, I'm going to say Mosswort Bridge is probably like 35 cents.
You might be a little high on that one, Corey. I'll confirm for you.
9 cents.
Uh,
um,
right now we got at the lowest. You're pretty close, but I do have 29 cents.
uh, you might want to refresh that later because now that I've hyped it up, it will clearly get the extra 6 cents. This is going up Friday morning. You hit refresh Friday at lunchtime, and tell me if that's not at least $35. Not 35 cents. It's gonna be $35.
It's just dropped down to 0.25. It's
Oh
losing
God.
value as we're
I'm
talking
sorry.
about it.
I take it back. I take it back. Listen, if I had that power, where if I spoke and things cratered, let me tell you my opinion on Mana Crypt, on Jeweled Lotus, on Black Lotus, like
Well,
the whole Power 9, really.
it's funny that you're talking about Mana Crypt because we all know what's coming out in Ixalan in 10 different flavorful foil printings. So I think we might see a
I
drop in price.
That one, and then what was it, Satoru Umizawa, like or Kamigawa? They were showing they had like multiple color printings, and
Right.
yet I have yet to actually see somebody that got the alternate freaking colors.
I thought it was a Hidetsugo version.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It is Hedasugo. But either way, like I've yet to see somebody have alternate colors of it. I don't.
Hidetsugo Devouring Chaos, of which will put you back $1,184 for the red ink variation. Maybe I'm wrong about Mana Crypt then.
Or I mean, what is that like? If so $1,800, it'll put me back.
No, no, no. Only
Purchases
$1,200. $1,200.
only $1,200. Okay, so that's like 3,600 Mosswort bridges right now.
And I'm looking and I'm seeing it. Only three have been purchased in the last 3 months, and it's one a month. So you
Have
can
they
tell
been
that.
wait, have they been purchased? Is this like ask now price or is this like verified purchase price?
No, these are verified purchases. One at 1,050, one at 1,094, and one at 1,000. So you're actually, if you're trying to get onto it now, you're gonna have to. I'm seeing some on here low as the low price of only 1,049. So you could take out a small loan. You could put a mortgage on your house and maybe pick a
You
couple of
know,
these up.
I've got a bill. I've got some bills to pay. Excuse me while I'm gonna hop off real quick and I'm gonna go hit Control P over by my printer. Don't worry about it. I'll see you on the streets of eBay.
Wee, 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 wee. Knock, 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 knock. Well, it's just
Oh
me
god, they're
now.
coming for me.
My co-host has
Next up,
been arrested.
next up on our list, guys, we're moving on to the opposite of Lorwyn, ironically. So Hideaway came up in Lorwyn. Now we're looking at Shadowmoor. So the dusk has settled into Shadowmoor, where we were introduced to Wither. So Wither is whenever the creature with Wither deals damage, it deals it in the form of -1/-1 counters. That's right. Eat your heart out, Tox Real players. We now have that essentially an Arachdos set. But these, when they deal damage, whether that's to creatures, well, not whether that's to creatures, when it deals damage to creatures, they get -1/-1 counters that stick well beyond the end of turn. And then if they deal damage to the player, they just deal regular combat damage. So it's kind of cool. It's almost like infect, as it were, except you're not doing the 10 toxic counter spiel.
Right. I mean, it gives you the same effect when you deal damage as though you had infect, but it doesn't, just want to be clear, those 1/1 counters are only for creatures. It's not any sort of, weird shenanigans where players are getting
Mhm.
1/1 counters or planeswalkers are getting 1/1 counters. This is just a damage modifier, and it still will trigger damaging abilities like cards that say when, say Cole Wrath Knight deals damage to a creature, even though you're only placing 1/1 counters, it will still trigger those effects.
Mhm. I really like this. So, vast majority of these are in red, black, or mono black colors. Um, but I really like this in like a red, black, green combination because I'm trying to build a Marika deck, and Marika is the in-universe version of. Oh god, I'm blanking now. Bianca from the Street Fighter universe.
Oh, okay. With the universe within?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it Bianca or is it Zangief? I think it's Bianca.
Zangief
Basically
is
where
the Jund one.
yeah, yeah. So Bianca, where when you deal combat damage, if you deal excess combat damage, it forces them to sacrifice permanents. So I
Okay.
like this in that sense because if you can give either in or out of universe version Wither, and then you put effects on there that force it to get blocked. And even if you're attacking like so Marika's a 7/4, but even if you're being blocked by like a, I don't know, a 10/10, then you're at least putting those wither counters on it and weakening that 10/10 down for later because Marika also has indestructible on your turn. So you can kind of throw it into combat without a lot of worries.
I really like a lot of the Wither cards are pretty interesting. There's one that I have fond memories of getting the crap kicked out of me by, which is the one I mentioned earlier, Kolrath Knight. It's
Mhm.
2 hybrid red black and 3 for a flying Wither elemental knight. It says creatures your opponents control with counters on them can't attack or block. So the Wither in this doesn't necessarily take the main stage. It's that creatures your opponents control with counters on them can't attack or block, but it weaponizes your Wither and makes it so you're not going to be blocking forever with those creatures, as well as any sort of counter shenanigans. When I might be playing 1/1 counters. Well, now all my creatures can't attack anybody or block anybody's creatures. He played it in a oh man, I have a hard time remembering the name, but he was putting counters all over other people's creatures, and it was a very dangerous deck.
Oxrill. Actually, I mean, if it's black red, this is probably not the one you're thinking of, but this would fit really well into like a Scorpion God deck, which we talk about as the lesser of the three like Amonkhet gods, at least as far as like popularity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it fits directly into a Scorpion God deck. I do want to bring up it's Mathas Fiendseeker. I'm gonna get my ear torn off for not being able to remember that name, but the card was Mathas Fiendseeker. But I love the
Like you
Scorpion
said, it's
God, and
Toxrill.
no, no, no. Finally, we broke Toxrill.
Finally, yeah, at least somebody could do it. Yeah, I really like this. I think this. I've never tried this in Scorpion God, but as I'm looking at it and thinking about it, hey, that seems like a perfect fit. It's in the right colors. It's already doing what you want to do in that style of deck. Um, I also like that there's a lot of not well, when I say a lot, let's use heavy quotation marks here, but there are equipment and there's also like enchantments and stuff that you can give things wither. Um, so one of my favorite ones there's Fist of the Demigod, which is one an Arachnos hybrid. It's an aura, and then if the creature is black, it gets +1/+1 in wither. If it's red, it gets +1/+1 in first strike. So if you're talking about a Scorpion God, or you're talking about a Marika, or you're talking about any of those that are both colors, I mean, you're already starting off with +2/+2, first strike, wither, plus whatever else, you know, is written out on that card,
There's a
which
whole
sounds like a
cycle.
pretty lethal combo.
Those that whole cycle is just absolutely amazing. There's like Spear of the Godhead, which is a blue white one, and there's
Mhm.
Shield of the Eversoul. Or there's so many cool. It would be a really fun deck to build a Wooburg commander with all of those. If it's this color, if it's this color, and just have an absolute blast.
Yeah, it's almost like the opposite of having all the swords. Like now I've got protection from blue and white. This one gives me protection from green and red. It's like that, except I'm getting buffs for everything. But I think that this one also has like some really unique design space, especially now that Toxic has entered the main stage and Infect's kind of gotten like a revamp via Toxic. I like the idea of having things that maybe would have Wither and you could partner with like a trample type ability. So you go, hey, I'm gonna punch through, I'm gonna give -1/-1 counters to something, and then if I don't actually kill it through the -1/-1 counters, I'm trampling over, and then next turn I'm doing it again.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think that sounds brutal.
And if you like this kind of effect for everybody, they do have Everlasting Torment, which was actually the card I was first introduced to this ability through. Which is just it's an enchantment. Players can't gain life, so no one's gaining life. Damage can't be prevented, and then all damage is dealt as if the source had Wither. So essentially, you really have to think about your blocks because anything you throw out to block, even if it comes back winning that combat, you're going to have those counters slapped on it. So I think this is a lot of fun in like a fight deck and anything where you get multiple combats, multiple attacks in per turn. I love it. I think this should see a comeback. And I think this is one of those things where the time is right for it because other similar abilities have shown popularity. We talk about Toxrill shown popularity for the worst case. And on the up end or the higher case, Toxic and Infect have shown some popularity in recent sets.
I was going to say popularity is a pretty interesting word for anybody to describe Toxrill.
Toxrill is the if you play it, you love it. If you are the other three people sitting there, you don't hate Toxrill, but you definitely hate the person playing Toxrill.
Now, I could hate on Toxrill all night, but there's kind of a cool coincidence here.
Mhm.
Toxrill, he's a Demir commander, but coincidentally, my keyword that I've chosen next is a keyword that only exists in the Demir color pie. It only exists in blue and black cards or hybrid blue and black cards. It's from Gatecrash. It's it's like a guild trait, but it's Cipher. Now, with Cypher, you cast a spell. It's typically an instant or sorcery, and then you may exile it encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of this card without paying its mana cost. So you're basically, casting. The spell that I've used the most is Whispering Madness, which is an absolute powerhouse in my Scarab God Demir Reanimator deck. It's basically a windfall for one extra mana and one black color pip. But you're ciphering it onto a creature you control. So you can wheel your hand away, and then that very same turn attack with something that either has haste or has already been on the field. And if you're able to deal damage, sometimes that's a political maneuver. You can convince your opponents that they would like, maybe they don't like their hand and they'd love to windfall again. So they allow you to deal the damage with the Whispering Madness, and you get away with it with a madman, like a madman. There's some other really cool cards in this set, but they're entirely contingent upon you dealing damage with your creatures. So it's not entirely a spell casting based ability because you either have to have heavy flyers or it's things that can't be blocked to actually get the hit.
Yeah, but I'll say yes, you do have to get the hit through, but I think Demir actually works best for this kind of ability. One from a flavor standpoint, because when you think of Cypher, you're thinking of hackers and spies and that kind of stuff, which is a very Demir, spy ninja type flavoring. But also, when you look at Black and Blue, there's a lot more of those, one mana, this creature cannot be blocked style creatures, or one mana in black, and this thing has shadow, or just those kind of things. Essentially, what would you stick in a Yuriko deck in order to cheat Yuriko in? There's a lot of those. Your Slither Blade, stuff like that.
Because of that, they often cost pretty exorbitant mana values, but you're getting so much value out of basically being able to cast them twice on first cast, provided you have a creature that can deal damage. And then with cards like double strike, or I'm sorry, with cards that have double strike or anything that allows you to
Mhm.
deal multiple combat steps, you're going to be able to get a lot of value out of these spells.
I like this. So I'll be honest with you. As we're sitting here recording, right? Cipher has always been that keyword where I know of its existence. I personally have never used a cipher card in my life, and I think it's just because it's got such a large text box on it that my eyes just glaze over. But now that I'm actually looking at it, it's really not that complex of an ability. I just I just look at it and I'm like, listen, man, I already got to remember first strike and flying and flash and everything else. And oh, no, am I gonna see Cipher ever again? Do I need to commit it to memory?
Well, if if you need to take a card, I would say Whispering Madness is awesome, and the art looks exactly like Eminem, which is a talking point every time you play Whispering
Oh my
Madness.
god, he does look just like Eminem.
Chicka chicka Slim Shady. But
It's
jokes
it's
aside,
Eminem with like a skeleton whispering into his ear.
a creepy gas, spectral skeleton, which is not unlike the real Eminem himself. But
Sure.
all jokes aside, if we were looking for that kind of design space to take Cipher, the only obviously you can kind of stick a generic like this a creature that would allow you to cast spells from your hand as though they had Cipher. Maybe something kind of similar to an Hello, where the first
Mhm,
instant or sorcery that you cast on your turn has Cipher. But there's other ways you could do this. I kind of thought of a little bit more abstract one, which would be like whenever you dealt damage with a creature that is encoded, for each other player that has been damaged this turn in combat, you would be able to cast or copy the encoded spell and cast those copies. So, you're getting either, two or three copies, hopefully in
mhm.
a game off of
What I
this
think
cipher.
what I think would be interesting is if you could either do either an aura or a creature that had an ability that said something along the lines of like, whenever this creature or whenever enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, you can select an instant or sorcery from your graveyard and encode it onto this creature as though it had cipher. I
I
think
love
that
that.
would be an interesting design space.
Yeah, I think that sounds excellent. You could even play around with like if they have to deal the damage first and then they get it. So because otherwise you could set up some
Trigger
pretty
right
sick,
away. Mhm.
nasty combos out of your graveyard that maybe they wouldn't intend to
Oh
create.
yeah, and I mean if you did that in blue black and stuck it on like I don't know an expropriate or a uh, um extra turn like any extra
Any
turn
number of
spell really,
extra turn spells.
yeah, would just be disgusting.
So realistically, maybe Cipher needs to be restricted in that sense. That's a really great point.
Yeah, I think what Cypher does is similar to what Casualty does, which is if you look at the like let's take in Hello out of the picture of Casualty, right? And let's just look at the cards that actually come with Casualty and the cards that just come with Cypher, they're kind of overpriced for their ability. I mean, Writ of Return is 5 mana for target creature, target creature card or return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. But I mean, reanimate is not 5. There's other animate like reanimator spells or abilities that aren't costing you 5 mana.
And
So
don't bring your
it's
creatures in tapped.
yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like a pricey effect, but it's pricey because you're getting it, every turn. Same for the casualty stuff. Usually it's like either overpriced or it's a kind of a mediocre-ish kind of effect for the price. But the thought is you're sacrificing a creature and you're automatically getting a copy.
Yeah, they definitely take that into account with the mana values. But overall, it's a pretty interesting spell, especially if you're able to get it onto a creature that's pretty evasive and
Mhm.
guarantee that you're hitting those time after time.
Yeah. But there you have it, guys. So we've made it through 4. We've got 4 more we want to look at, but before we hop into those 4, we are going to take a quick break, get ourselves some water, re-energize, refocus, and then we'll be tackling why reach should be on every single card.
Spiders brought to you by spiders.
Yeah, brought to you by Shelob, child of Ungoliath. And we're back from break. Thanks for sticking it out with us, guys. We are once again talking about different keywords and abilities we would like to see get a little more love out there in the Magic the Gathering community, and more importantly, in the sets. So we've gone through 4. We've got 4 more, 2 from myself, 2 from Cole that we wanted to tackle still. The next ability we're going to be looking at is Dash. So Dash is a very, I almost want to say, not evergreen, but it's such a straightforward ability. I think we're going to see it pop up in the future. But right as of right now, there's only 22 cards with Dash in total. But how Dash works is instead of paying the mana value for the card, you can actually pay the Dash cost. It's usually either one mana higher or one mana lower than the mana value. The creature comes out, has haste, and comes back to your hand at the end or at the beginning of the next end step. So into your turn, usually you bounce it back to your hand. General thoughts on Dash, or have you played a lot of Dash cards?
Well, when I first started the game, there was kind of a notorious one mana dasher named by the name of Zurgo Bellstriker. That's right. You might have thought I was going to say the other notorious one mana dasher, but this is the OG one mana dasher. And he said Zurgo Bellstriker can't block creatures with power 2 or greater. It was kind of an interesting ability, but with the prevalence of a monkey pirate by the name of
Mm,
Ragavan,
love him.
I'm pretty familiar with Dash. If you're unfamiliar with Ragavan, whenever he deals combat damage to a player, he makes a treasure and exiles the top card of the defending player's library, and you may cast that card until end of turn. And if you're able to dash him in and out, he always has haste, and he's difficult to remove if you're not ready to remove him on an opponent's turn.
Yeah, and you can even dash him. This is a weird interaction I don't think a lot of people are aware of. You can actually dash him out of the command zone. Now you do pay command tax on that if he ends up going back to the command zone, but you can dash him out for 2 and a red, do what you need to do on that turn, and then instead of going back to the command zone on the instep, he returns to your hand, so you already have that loop going where you basically next turn 2 mana, jump him out from your hand, and over again. Um, Dash, this is where I think Dash would really shine, and I think it's starting to shine in like newer sets. So traditionally, a lot of these dash command or not commanders, but creatures, they all have attack triggers or when they deal damage triggers. So the thought is, you swing it in with haste, hit something, or hit the person has their defenses down the most, and then it returns back to your hand, and you kind of like cycle it over and over again. But in recent years, they've done a good job of putting out new cards that have ETB triggers. And I think that right there is where Dash really shines because that's a guarantee. You're not necessarily guaranteed to do combat damage. Like Ragavan's not guaranteed to come out and hit somebody. They might have a blocker up. But I'm pretty much, unless you're running a counter spell, pretty much guaranteed to dash in something and get the ETB off of it.
Elish Norn, mother of machines. GG, scrub.
Get good. So a couple cool ideas. I like kind of where their headspace is at. Is we've got Death Greeter Champion is a like a newer one from March of the Machine, and it has backup one, which is another ability we won't get into right this second. But essentially, when it enters the battlefield, you can gift an ability to another creature. So this one lets you dash out, put double strike in this specific case on a different creature, and you'll have not only a hasty double striking Death Greeter's champion, but you'll now put double strike on something else that might really value it on your battlefield, and then on your instep, Death Greeter's champion back to your hand, and then you can do that ability over and over again on every single one of your turns. And not only are you giving that creature double strike, or whatever other creature double strike, but with the backup ability, you're also putting a counter on something, so you're kind of guaranteeing yourself each turn or each one of your turns that you can put a counter out, give something double strike. Another cool idea they've had with this recently is in Lord of the Rings. We've gotten Riders of Rohan, which is a 5 mana 4/4 human knight that says when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste, or you can dash it out for 4 a red and a white, so 1 extra mana, and essentially get that ETB over and over and over again. And spoiler alert, getting a lot of humans or a lot of knights out usually has really good synergies.
Yeah, and like you said, if you're able to, ETBs are something that you can double up on. You can, take advantage of just the fact that you're
Mhm.
casting them multiple times. It's a way that capitalizes on the dash and doesn't risk your resources. You could even, with giving your creatures double strike and backup, that just has so much, application to cards like Ragavan that care about dealing combat damage. And you
Mhm.
can give some surprising strength to the weaker creatures in your deck.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. If you combine these two, if you combine Deathgritter's Champion, you combine Ragavan. I mean, you could put Ragavan out, follow it up with Deathgritter's Champion, make because of the backup one, Ragavan then becomes a 3/2. If you put the counter 3/2 with double strike, so suddenly you're doing 6 damage to somebody, making 2 treasure tokens, exiling the top 2 cards from their library that you can then cast. Like you're getting a lot of value out of something, and then you do get that protection. So if these are valuable pieces to your combo, they're back in your hand, which is not fully safe, but it's definitely a lot safer than sitting it out in the battlefield.
It's a cost, and it's interesting that a lot of these have a higher mana cost to dash them than you would just regular casting them, because you are going to have to
Mhm.
cast them again several times. So you're kind of debating whether or not, if at a point you're that effect isn't helping you, or you're ready to start kind of building a more permanent board, you could typically, cast them a little bit better on curve than if you're trying to repeatedly cast a 6 mana, dash creature every turn.
Yeah, and I think that's why if Dash is going to continue to pop up, and I hope it does, I think the direction they need to go in is more of ETBs or more of like your backups or things of that nature where you're getting something on the ETB. If it's strictly going to be combat focused, like hey, the abilities when it deals combat damage, you get blank, then it's kind of pointless because you could just bring that creature out. No, the only advantage is you're getting haste on the very first turn you're bringing it out. But other than that, it's almost better just to bring it out, let it sit there and attack over and over and over again, and save yourself the mana in the long run. Especially in red, where I mean, the things that can give your stuff haste in red are many. Like I don't know too many people that are running red creature decks that don't have haste enablers.
Well, and now that I'm thinking about it, if you had flash or some way to, cast these creatures that have ETBs on everybody's turn with your dash
Mhm.
effect, that would be a pretty cool way to capitalize on the forced bounce back to your hand.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thought. I suppose you could have something out that says all your permanents have flash, like all your creatures have flash or something. And then you, because it has flash, you dash it out of your hand, and maybe you could get like a surprise block in that someone wasn't expecting.
Absolutely, but
Because if you,
go on.
I was gonna say, if you had nothing on your board and then you flashed in like Riders of Rohan for its dash cost. Well, I don't even know the. Well, yeah, because the advantage to the dash cost would be that you bounce it back to your hand. But you could bring that out, get the tokens out, and you've got like 3 blockers when you had nothing a second ago.
I'm a huge fan of combat tricks, so anything
Mhm.
that's going to make you look weaker than you actually are. I mean, that's like some art of war principles there. Look weak when you are strong, look strong when you are
Mhm.
weak, and it allows for some crazy plays.
Yeah, so I like it. I think, but I do think that going forward, I want to see more ETBs and things like that, or even hey, if they made a really cool leave the battlefield effect, that would be great. or if they made one that had all three. Like, when do I get a creature that's when it enters the battlefield do X, when it deals combat damage do X, when it leaves the battlefield do Y, and then I get all three in one fell swoop, and then at the end it just says dash whatever dash cost.
Well, I can rest assure you that that'd be a pretty strong card.
Yeah, I can also rest assured probably will never happen. That's too many I think triggers on one single card.
Well, speaking of kind of like complicated and too many triggers, the next keyword that we're going to talk about has a similar reputation for being pretty confusing, and it's called banding. Have you heard of banding, Corey?
I have blacked out banding because I frankly it's a hoax and I will never run into it in a single commander game. The
Well,
day I sit down and somebody runs their banding deck is the day I immediately stand up and I devote the rest of my life to Yu-Gi-Oh.
Well, then go ahead and sell your collection and invest in some ash blossoms because banding is coming back. Now, banding for the uninformed, it gives creatures the ability with creatures that have the ability banding, the ability to attack and aband. You're also able to take one creature without banding in this band, and bands are blocked as groups. If any creature that you control with banding are being blocked or being blocked by a creature, you divide that combat damage, not its controller, among any of the creatures that it's being blocked by. So it kind of changes the traditional rules of Magic, where the defender typically gets, or the attacker gets to decide how they're going to split up the damage. This allows you to take control in a more defensive manner, and rearrange all of the damage to the one creature you control with Indestructible, allowing you to kind
Now
of circumvent the combat step.
let me ask you this. Just listening to your explanation. How did you find this explanation? Because I'm pretty sure if you go and type banding into like the MTG wiki or even the Wizards of the Coast website, you just get like a 404 error page and it redirects you to like First Strike or something like that.
They
I guarantee you there's no way you found this.
they want you to forget about banding. Banding is an alpha keyword, meaning it was printed in the first set of Magic the Gathering. The
You mean
last
like alpha as in first set, not alpha as in like it's the pinnacle? It's a pinnacle keyword.
Well, you are an alpha if you're playing these cards, but this is literally from Magic's conception. It
Mm,
quickly was opted out as soon as the fifth edition, which was very quickly after Magic's conception in the last 30 years. So there's only 25 cards with banding, and
mm.
80% of them are white cards, but every other color has at least like one, maybe two banding cards. They discovered pretty quickly that banding is either really strong or either really bad. They couldn't figure it out, and they've definitely neutered banding from ever coming back. But I think it has a lot of potential. You see an older card like Soraya the Falconer. It's two white and one colorless for a legendary. I believe she's a human. She gives all falcons +1/+1. And now falcon has been errata to be bird. There's albatross. There's several other different bird creature types
So
that have been all
I want a
conjoined.
all falcon. I just want a solo falcon build with this as my commander.
Well, I implore you to give it a shot, but she would be the best one for it because she also allows you to pay one and a white and give target falcon banding until end of turn. Now, this has a lot of tech with your Maskwood Nexus, anything that's, your conspiracy type cards that are going to turn creature types into falcons. Now, you might ask, how are you going to play any of those cards in a mono white deck? Well, you're gonna have to open your mind to a world where banding is fully Wooburg. I want banding to
I'm
be given
just
to all sorts of underrepresented tribes and kind of give a sort of a fallback for anything that, maybe only has 6 or 7 creatures. Like if you're
sure
looking at Aurochs or something to that effect.
this. I'm sorry, but this is like the thought of someone running Maskwood Nexus to go, oh ha ha! Now all my falcons are rising as one. So, this is this like everyone goes, hey, if your creature type does not come with a commander, you run Morophon. Is this what you're telling me? Is
Uh,
this is like the Morophon of banding?
I would say safely, this is the Morphon of banding. You're gonna want to be running this in your Morphon decks as well. And you know what? While
Sure.
you're at it, why don't you just run Morphon as a Falcon deck and put some banding cards in there? I think it's a strong build. When you see other banding cards, it kind of puts it into relevance. Like there's a really cool card called Camel for 1 white mana, and
Mhm.
it bans, and it gives some creatures will give you effects if they are banding, and Camel will give all creatures attacking in a band with it immunity to damage done by deserts. That's right.
Finally, finally.
Finally, you can stop being held hostage by your friends running, desert decks. Desert being a land that taps and deals 1 damage to target attacking creature, only activated during the combat step, obviously. But this is
What
kind
what
of a
is
silver
what is
bullet.
what is Camel's attack and or toughness and power?
Camel is a 0/1, so
Okay,
you're
so I have to attack. I have to swing in with Camel at 0 in order for Desert to then trigger someone to tap Desert to try and deal 1 damage to my 4 toughness, 0 power attacking Camel, and then I prevent it with Camel's ability.
you might have misheard me there, but he's a 0/1. He's not even a zero
So
four.
so
Uh,
this actually keeps him alive
Well, and
through
and you'll recall
Mission
that
of
with
Desert
banding,
Storms.
your attacks are similarly to to the uh, change in the
Band.
defense. You're basically attacking
Mhm.
with an entire band. So if one part of it gets blocked, the whole thing gets blocked. So even though he is a 0/1, you're not playing him for the attack damage. You're playing him for the immunity to desert and the ability to carry many jewels across many deserts.
And let's not forget that massive 1 toughness that he's throwing in.
He's he's not a he's ain't gonna fall to a doom blade or a lightning bolt. That's right, he is both of those things.
So to simplify this in layman's terms, so banding is essentially like I'm attacking with a stack. I just have a stack of creatures. I've made my own little army or band, and I'm attacking all as one, I'm blocking all as one, and I'm moving the combat damage around as needed.
That's precisely right. It does give you a bit of a benefit if you have creatures with um trample and that sort of thing. Obviously you're going to want to be dealing damage through your band, because if it's easily
Mhm.
blocked with a 2/2, you're not going to have a fun time. But I think banding has a lot of potential to come back. The most recent, obviously I told you that the last card was in 5th edition, but that's not entirely true. There was a mystery booster playtest card released in 2019 called Banding Sliver that gives all slivers banding. This is, this,
Sure.
obviously slivers are strong enough without banding. It's more of a joke, but I do think that it gives a little bit of relevance to underplayed tribes such as camels.
I think you know what this reminds me of? Like if we had to take this into a modern perspective of Magic, this reminds me a lot of Mutate, in the sense that Mutate, you have one creature that has like a huge stack of abilities of everything you've combined together.
Right.
This is like the attacking and defense version of that, like the combat version of that.
I think it has a chance to come back. It doesn't. Although it's a bit complicated. It's like you said. It's just a basic combat change that probably would be a little healthy for the format.
I think this is one of those things where, because it's such a older keyword that has kind of been lost to the sands of time, swept into the desert, if you will. It's very hard to have it make a comeback, but we were talking about this kind of off camera or off mic. That if you look at other games, like if you were to take this into like a miniatures kind of format or like a war gaming kind of format, it's a very simple concept of, hey, if I have two units of whatever, two soldiers or two tanks or anything like that, and you put them together, suddenly you've got twice as strong of an army. And it's just such a very duh kind of mechanic, and you see it a lot in like mobile games and stuff like that, where you merge your two units together to make a larger army or a larger legion or something. Whereas because it's in paper, like that's on cardboard, banding alone is like, you look at the rule book, and I'm pretty sure a whole centerfold pops out of like subtext rules of how it interacts with everything else.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you're if you frequent the subreddit, the EDH subreddit, you've probably heard about the mono white Elesh Norn banding deck with mass land destruction. And so, I mean, there are some ways to
Oh no.
exploit this mechanic, but it's yeah, it's a little, it's maybe not as intuitive when you read it. It gets a lot more intuitive as you play it.
I think it's intuitive as you play it. I think this overcomes the hurdle of like, it's like a meme almost, to the point of everybody going, "What's banding do? Ha ha ha!" It's like people trying to explain what Wheel of Misfortune is. It's almost like memeable to that extent. So I feel like if you brought this deck, you would understand it, but you have to realize every game you play outside of your regular play group, you'd have to explain the rules over again.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is a pretty unique keyword.
Yeah. But moving from banding, we're going to be looking at now a backup, the other B. So we didn't talk about backup when we were talking about Dash in Death Greeter's Champion, because we're going to talk about backup now. So backup is the newest mechanic we're going to be talking about, or newest keyword we're going to be talking about today. It came out this very year, only a few sets ago. Backup creatures, so they enter the battlefield and they're going to have a number. So backup 1, backup 3, whatever the number is. So when the creature enters the battlefield, you're going to put that number of 1/1 counters on target creature. You can put it on itself, or you can put it on another creature. And if you put it on another creature, it gains the following abilities, and then whatever abilities it has listed underneath that for the card. So in Death Gridder's Champion sense, it had double strike. So you're going to put a counter on something. If you put it on a counter or you put it on a creature that's not Death Greeter's Champion, that creature also gets double strike till end of turn. It's very straightforward, but there's really cool abilities that you can attach to creatures that shouldn't necessarily have them. And because we're talking about counter synergies, you do have a lot of other cards out there that just love the fact that you're putting counters on things.
This came out in March of the Machine, and it's
Mhm.
primarily a kind of a Timur mechanic. You're going to see a lot of this in the green, red, and blue. You're also going to see a lot of white cards with it. But I agree with you. It has a lot of synergy with +1/+1 effects, and then a lot of these abilities are just things that you see them and you're like, oh, I actually really would like my, Blightsteel Colossus to be attacking with the, effect of a emergent woodworm or something, some other card that you might not have ever heard of, but that gives a rather strong ability with backup.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's also the fact that a couple, not a lot of them, but a couple of them because of a smaller card pool right now, have like backup. So they've got multiple instances of backup on the same card, which does play into some kind of cool synergies as well. So Conclave Sledge Captain, which is in the backup or calling for backup precon deck, has backup one 3 times. So you have 3 instances, meaning you can either put 3 counters on something, or you can put 1 counter on 3 different things. And if you end up putting 1 counter on 3 different things, all 3 of those things until end of turn get trample and also get whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many 1/1 counters on it. But where this gets really cool is because of 3 separate instances. If you have something like a Hardened Scales out, it's going to see those 3 separate instances, instead put 2 counters on everything. Or if you have, like, I run a Shalayan Halar deck, which is whenever a counter gets placed on something, you deal that much damage to a player. If you had, say, a straight up backup 3, that means I can only do one burst of 3 to one specific player. But if I have backup 1 3 times, I can do 1 damage and ping 3 different people. So it helps you kind of like spread around and get a couple different triggers just off the fact that it's split up that way.
Now, with Conclave Sledge Captain, are you able to choose three? Are you able to choose the same target 3 times with those backup triggers, or does it have to be different creatures?
No, you can. So if you wanted to, you can pick you can even pick Conclave Sledge Captain 3 times if you wanted to, and have it come in as a 7/7.
Now, for instance, it's like if that's another creature, it gains the following abilities until end of turn. So if you gave it the same doubling ability 3 times, or the ability that gives you 1/1 counters
Sure.
according to the combat damage that it's dealt, do you get 3 instances of that same ability? So it would give you 3 times the combat damage.
You know what? I have not looked into that because I think so. If I'm reading it like this, I want to say you would. Now there might be some specific thing that I'm missing, but yeah, I'd want to say if you gave whatever creature, if you gave it backup one 3 times, you would have obviously trample would just apply once because you're not going to have trample. But then the other aspect, you should have 3 instances listed of it, of whenever this creature deals combat damage, put that many 1/1 counters. So then if you had, let's say you had a 1/1 and you did this 3 times, so you should have a 4/4 with the counters put on. And then whenever it deals combat damage, it would put, what, 12 counters on itself? Because 3 instances of 4 damage. So for that turn, I mean, you could turn a 1/1 into a 16/16 right off the top of my head.
Well, and I'm just thinking of the applications here with anything that doubles ETB effects and gives you
Mhm.
additional backups. It sounds like there's certainly a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of potential there. It's also the fact that you're kind of sneaking abilities out there that people aren't expecting. So if you look at, like, let's look at the same example. So Conclave Sludge Captain, and that ability of whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many 1/1 counters on it, right? So when you play it, it's not, it doesn't have haste in of itself. You could give it haste some other way, but you might have another creature that, say, has flying that really matters. What its power is. Let's say I had like a Balefire Dragon or something, because I that's just the way life is. Suddenly, until the end of turn, I just gave my Balefire Dragon the ability to not only have trample, but tack on all these counters. So suddenly I've just pumped that creature out of nowhere, and now it's incredibly hard to deal with. So there's a ways to bust I think this ability by giving things abilities that like inherently they should not have for balance reasons.
I really like there's a card Guardian Scale Lord that reanimates cards, as well as it has the ability on its own body, and so doubling down on like reanimation effects and these kind of unique circumstances, it gives you a lot of freedom to splash these cards even if you're not playing a dedicated backup deck. It's like sometimes it's just a generic effect that's really good. The card we kind of talked about earlier, the Emergent Woodworm, has backup 3, so it gives you 3/1/1 counters. And whenever the creature that has this ability attacks, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is its power, and you can put a permanent with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield. So granted, that is a 7-drop creature. It's in green. You're going to be ramping into it, and this is a way to kind of make your big creatures even more lethal when they're able to search you that many cards deep into your deck.
Mhm. Well, I like that too for Emergent Woodworm because you're also thinking about the long-term, short-term benefits. So in this sense, so if you bring it out and you have 3 counters to put on something, do you put it on something else, get that ability right away, or do you put it on Woodworm, now going, okay, 7's its power that I can use over and over again each turn after this? And it's kind of an interesting thought process to have. That they have all kinds of really kind of cool ones. One of my favorite, like my absolute favorite backup cards so far, actually isn't in this like teamer color pattern, but it's over in black, is Archpriest of Shadows, which is for 5 mana. It's got backup 1, Death Touch, and then whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or a battle, in case you're seeing a lot of battles in your league right now,
As we are,
um,
as we are.
as we are, you return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So
Okay.
already people don't want to block it because it's a 4/4 with Death Touch, and the turn you're bringing it out, you're putting a counter, and because Death Touch is listed under backup, below the backup ability, you're gifting something Death Touch until the end of the turn if you pick another creature, and you're getting a repeatable reanimator.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a pretty lethal combo, and with a lot of these, being ETB effects, there's ways that you can kind of abuse that at flash speed to donate
Mhm.
effects. Where you're like, oh well, he can't block me with that Death Toucher; it's tapped. It's like not right, not so well. And of course, if you're flashing, blinking something back in, obviously you could attack,
Yeah.
you could block with that thing as well. But it just gives you a little bit of versatility with any flash effects.
Mhm. Yeah, now, so for me, this is my fourth one. This was my 4 of 4, but I really wanted to highlight it because even though it's new, I think there's a lot of design space here. I also think that we have a good possibility of seeing it again for the simple fact that if we look at like Casualty's tied specifically thematically into the Maestros and all that of New Capenna, a lot of like the Strixhaven type abilities like Magecraft and stuff like that. They're kind of like tied specifically into the theme of the set, whereas backup I would argue it's not as heavily tied into like one particular, like grouping. It's not like, oh, hey, this is specific for, the cons of Tarkir, or, this one, like family of New Capenna, or this one school of Strixhaven, or anything like that. I think it's a pretty universally splashable set, like ability that they could put in any set.
Absolutely.
So going from backup, bring us home. What was your fourth and final pick?
So I was a little bit biased on this one. I've kind of been thinking about it a lot recently, but I built a deck, a few years ago that was a 5-color Kamigawa Spirits deck, and this is before Neo Kamigawa or Neon Kamigawa. This was a 5-color OG Kamigawa Spirits, and another really popular keyword from the Champions of Kamigawa set was Splice, particularly Splice onto Arcane. Now, Splice
Mhm.
says that
Not
as you cast a spell that has that quality, like Arcane, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its Splice cost, which is typically a little more, maybe sometimes a little less. And if you do that, you get to add this card's effect to that spell. So I fell in love with this ability because it just felt like you get so much card advantage out of casting arcane spells and spending a lot more mana and revealing several splice spells from your hand and doubling down on all of those abilities and just getting to repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. But unfortunately, a lot of the splice cards are, flavorfully really cool, but mechanically maybe a little overcosted or kind of difficult to,
mm,
consistently get. Because especially in a game of Commander, you have a lot of opponents all swinging at you, and so when you're trying to set up a pretty mana intensive, I'm not, pretty mana intensive mechanic like splice, you have to not only have cards to splice, but you have to have arcane cards, and then you have to have creatures and things, which it just ends up being a little bit watered down. Now recently they printed a card, Fell Beast's Shriek, and this is in the Lord of the Rings Commander decks. That is it has a different version of Splice. It says Splice onto instant or sorcery. Now, this feels like such a refreshing change from the OG Splice, just because you find yourself, if you're not unfamiliar with the arcane spells, the one that you've definitely seen before is Kodama's Reach, which is pretty much
mm.
mechanically, the same as Cultivate, just with the stapled on extra of Arcane. So you're able to see that there are spells that are relevant with the arcane ability, but the majority of them are just kind of outdated as they're from Champions of Kamigawa. Currently, there's 27 splice onto arcane cards, and there's 2 splice onto instant or sorcery cards.
So if I'm understanding this play style right, because I want to understand how this deck would hum right along. So the thought process is, let's say you play a Kodama's Reach, which is an arcane spell. So I
Right.
would have however much, I'd have 10 mana up ideally or something like that, and I would have a grip full of cards, and then you would tap all the splice effects, reveal all those cards, and suddenly Kodama's Reach is now like casting 5 or 6 spells, like the ability of 5 or 6 spells.
You're exactly right. And some of these spells are really relevant. You might have heard of Goryo's Vengeance, which is 2 mana originally, but it can be spliced for 3 mana, 2 and a black. And it returns target legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and gives that creature haste, except it gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step. This is a
Mm.
super versatile card because it can bring out blockers at instant speed, or it can, bring out a devastatingly high CMC, creature card that you've discarded early into the game. Now, it's limited by the fact that it's an instant and you're typically only going to be casting it once, but that splice onto the arcane allows you to, cast this over and over and over again. And so Goryo's Vengeance in particular is a pretty well-known card because it's been played in a lot of other formats. But I think that we'll eventually see improvement in the splice and splice onto arcane and splice onto instant, just because it's such a interesting concept that is clearly getting attention if they printed it in the Lord of the Rings set, which for reference came out not but a couple months ago.
Yeah, and I kind of like this compared to Cypher a little bit because the risk with Cypher is whatever you're encoding that spell onto, if that creature gets destroyed, you've kind of lost all that advantage, so to speak,
The
because
investment.
the yeah, because what you're encoding onto the original spell has been exiled, so you don't really have that spell really access to it anymore. Whereas with Splice, you can splice that onto a spell you're casting, and then that card still stays in your hand, so you can splice over and over and over again, and it's usually safer in your hand. The only downside is that you're casting it and using mana over and over again.
Right. And so at the end of the day, there are two different ways to kind of get more value out of your spells where you're getting to cast them multiple times, typically at a higher mana cost, like with Cypher, everything being a little bit overcosted, and then with the mana investment of having to splice onto Arcane. But it is a really unique concept. I think if they were going to kind of improve Splice, they would choose to either improve Splice or kind of, buff up those arcane cards. Maybe give us some newer, more relevant arcane cards or like modifiers, that something that would say like, you have the ability to cast instant or sorceries from the top of your library. Cards casted this way are considered arcane, allowing you to kind of take
Mm.
advantage of these older spells without having to, create a whole new suite of arcane cards, although there is a ton of design space for it. And then obviously with stuff like the Fell Beast Shriek, kind of opening up Splice as being a little bit more generic and splicing onto any instant or sorcery gives you a lot more relevance to some of these really interesting effects that you just unfortunately can't afford to put into your deck because of the restrictions of splicing onto Arcane.
Mhm. What I think what just jumped out to my mind, I think would be an interesting design space that would also play well into like the modern direction the game's going into is if they had something along the lines of like splicing onto sagas, or maybe this adds like an extra chapter onto your saga that does the effect of the spell.
I think that's a super unique idea, and it would have to be like an enchantment with splice onto Saga or something like that. That's really cool. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I think especially I mean if you look at 2023, how many enchantments have really blown up because Wild's Eldraine's obviously an enchantment focused set. There's been all kinds of cool enchantments that have come out of the earlier sets this year. So I think this is kind of the year of enchantments right now.
I think that's safe to say.
But there you guys have it. So we did 8 total keywords that we think should be revisited by Wizards of the Coast or brought back up a little more. But we did want to do something a little different to kind of help close it out here, which is we now must turn the corner and instead of hyping up what Wizards of the Coast should bring back, we wanted to warn them to never bring back a couple dishonorable mentions ever again. So Cole, you said what you love. Now tell us what's your dishonorable mention? What is the keyword you want to obliterate off the face of the earth?
Well, thanks for asking, Corey. I had a ton of options here. I scrolled through, and to be honest with you, I kind of settled on one that I think you'll be a little surprised to hear. Now I'll tell you my my
Mhm.
my runner up to my dishonorable mention was buyback. I think
Bushido. Oh.
buyback. I love Bushido. I think buyback is a little bit. It can be a little bit cheesy sometimes when you have the ability to like say you have a seedborn muse and you're constantly untapping and just generating so much
Mhm.
value out of a singular
And
cap
you're just
size. I love to see
yeah.
it, but to be honest with you, I think that's it's not entirely super fun to play against. But the card that I chose for my dishonorable mention, or the key word, is pretty rare. Only 5 cards in the history of Magic to be printed with this, one for each color in Wooburg. And the key word, if you're wondering at home, is epic. Now, epic comes
Mm.
from Saviors of Kamigawa, which actually was directly after Champions of Kamigawa. But it says for the rest of the game, you can't cast spells. At the beginning of each of your upkeeps, copy this spell, except for its epic ability, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So you're basically locking yourself into the same spell for the rest of the game. Now, provided you have some stuff on the board, you're not entirely out of options. But the fact that you're limiting yourself from ever casting another spell, and that's anything other than a land, it kind of leads to generic gameplay. Of course, it might be really strong, and some of these are really strong. For instance, like Enduring Ideal is the white spell. It's 7 mana, and it says search your library for an enchantment card and put it into play. Then shuffle your library. that's pretty relevant if you're able to assemble a nice little combo there. The blue one is much of the same. It allows you to take something from your opponent's library, and these cards are generally pretty cool. But sometimes getting locked into copying a spell makes you it gets you pretty vulnerable. And overall, I'd be okay if there were no more epic spells generated. I do think it is a fun keyword, but maybe not necessary for future gameplay.
Yeah, I actually do not like Epic at all because it's sort of like playing stacks on yourself. Like you're everyone complains about that player that plays a stacks deck and locks everyone else out of the game. And you've become that player, but you're only locking yourself out of the game. So it seems very counterintuitive to the at least to the gameplay style that I like to play, which is a lot of interaction, a lot of kind of playing on other people's turns, a lot of politicking, stuff like that. Because you also lose the ability to politic the table when you're sitting there going, well, everyone knows what I'm going to do on the next turn, and there's nothing I can really change about that.
Absolutely. What about you, Corey? What was your dishonorable mention?
Uh, so I went in a similar vein in the sense, not in the sense of like locking yourself out of the game, but I picked one that I also just find such an unenjoyable gameplay style, which is Morph. So Morph is it's kind of an older one. I don't think I've seen it on a lot of recent cards. But you can pay 3 generic to play a card face down as a 2/2 colorless creature, and then it'll have a morph cost that you can pay later to flip the card face up. And typically, these cards will have some ability like, hey, when this flips face up, tap target creature, or bounce this creature to its controller's hand, or something like that. Usually, they're not super flashy abilities, but they're like small incremental abilities. For me, I just don't find it to be a very fun play style because when I'm playing them face down, I'm paying 3 to get a 2/2 colorless creature, which is already a dookie rate, like just absolute garbage of a rate. Then I gotta pay a cost to make it flip face up. So I'm at least 4 mana at the bare minimum. If this thing costs 1 mana to flip face up, I'm 4 mana in for some effect that odds are is just gonna be tap target permanent or draw a card. Like it's just not that fun. And I play Magic because I love the art style. I love having the abilities on the front side of the card that are doing cool things, not because I just want to take a card off the top of my deck that I've already been looking at its sleeve for the whole time and then play it face down and look at my sleeves some more. It's just not for me.
Now, I know you have a little bit of experience with Yu-Gi-Oh, because isn't this kind of the one of the closest things to trap cards in the Magic universe?
Oh, so this is what is going to really baffle you. When I played more Yu-Gi-Oh, I love traps. I loved having traps, surprising people, all that kind of stuff. Great. I even love flip effects on Yu-Gi-Oh cards, like your man-eater bugs, your morphing jars, needle worms, all that kind of stuff. I don't know why. In Magic, I hate it. Probably because I feel like their flip up effects aren't as impactful. And the difference between this and a trap card in Yu-Gi-Oh is a trap card, your opponent rushes in for an attack typically, and that's when you're like, haha, here's my comeuppance. Like I've got him now. This one I have to pay mana for, so suddenly it's like I have to have a whole resource system going on to spring my trap. No. Heck no. It's not for me. I don't like it all.
It ain't worth it.
It ain't. Listen, if I'm playing 3 to 5 mana for nothing, like for just the barest of minimums, no thanks. I will say Magic has tried to reinvent this wheel for a long time because we were talking about keywords that have 20 cards, 10 cards that have these abilities. Morph has like 150 cards with this ability.
Well, and if you
Uh,
know that you have to remember Kadena the slinking sorcerer, who is a
uh-huh.
precon commander, based around Morph. So there's always going to be a decent bit of support for her, and it's going to be a deck that you might see a little bit often in your local meta because it has a lot of accessibility.
Yeah, but there you guys have it. We talked about everything we love. Now we talked about what we don't like. Question of the week, card of the week, and then we're gonna be wrapping up today's episode. Question of the week, sticking on the keyword theme, Cole. Donnie Dimes. Thank you, Donnie, for reaching out with your question. What is your favorite keyword and why?
So, my favorite keyword is something that is a little bit more common, but it gives me a ton of fun, and it's Cascade. Everybody loves seeing what the cascade, is going to be. You're flipping cards off the top of your library and making them rain. You're looking for that one specific number or less, and sometimes it takes quite a long time to get there, and it's a little bit of a thrill ride as you flip through 30, 40 cards looking for. I swear I have another one drop in here, guys, but I love Cascade because it's a bit random. It gives you a bit of a inconsistency boost, but in a very fun way.
Yeah, it's also something where you can, if you wanted to, you can build a very streamlined competitive deck with Cascade. Because go on any deck building website and you'll find a Cascade deck where somebody's optimized like my 7 drop has Cascade, so I only have so many 6 drops, and then I've got a 5 drop with Cascade, so I only have so many 4 drops, and they've just set up this whole system knowing that hey, here's the numbers that I need to get to these specific cards without whiffing as much.
Right. It definitely has the potential to combo off, and certainly people have played against Maelstrom Wanderer decks or even like the
Mhm.
first Sliver and seen just how strong Cascade is because it can sometimes be such a value engine, especially if the things that you're casting have Cascade themselves. You're just able to keep a chain. Going and going and
Yeah.
going and going, and you go from having nothing on the board to a board of 5 or 6 creatures, and that is a very satisfying feeling.
Yeah, and I think on the other end of the spectrum, in a casual setting, it does have that sort of like let's spin the wheel and just see what happens kind of thing, which also appeals to a different set of players, which are the hey, look, I want to see the big splashy thing. Like I don't know what's gonna happen. Let's we're playing Wheel of Fortune over here.
I like it a lot.
For me, yeah, for me, I picked the one that first drew me in when I started playing Magic, and that is Death Touch. Uh, I don't know, I just love Death Touch. I like the fact that I can have typically a small creature, but it feels so menacing. Like you can have a 1/1 and people have 6/6 tramplers, and they want nothing to do with you because they're so scared of your 1/1. Even though you're gonna lose the 1/1 with their 6/6 trampler, and you're gonna end up taking damage, they just they look at the fact that they spent so much mana resource in getting that larger creature. They look at the fact that they just don't want to deal with it, and the trade-off is so unbalanced that you're losing a 1 mana 1/1 death touch, and they're losing, a 5 mana 6/6 trampler or whatever the case is. I just enjoy it. And my very first deck that I ever built from scratch, which is not a commander deck, it's a modern deck, revolved entirely around first strike and death touch, and I still have it and I dust it off every now and then and just I love it so much.
I think Death Touch, like you said, you get so much value out of Death Touch. Even a 1 or 2 drop creature that has no power or toughness is going to hold off an army of creatures because typically, you're never going to swing if you want to keep those one of those creatures in particular alive. So you pull a lot of weight with a death toucher. You pull a lot of weight with a flying death toucher, and like we were talking about earlier, the ability to kind of give things death touch at instant speed is
Mhm.
super strong. And then if you're a fan of any sort of cards that deal, that ping or deal one damage to a different target, giving them death touch can be like setting up a machine gun, something like Goblin Sharpshooter. You're now able to plink off every single creature on the board and then some.
Yeah, or like like Kelsian, the Plague is a good one. The experience counter commander
Sure.
where you can tap it to ping people. You give it death touch, and suddenly whatever you ping, you're instantly knocking out, getting an experience counter, and you just kind of snowball that way. We talked about during the backup bits, we talked about Archpriest of Shadows, and that's got death touch. And just the fact that it has death touch in every game I've played it or I've seen someone play it, you end up reanimating like 3, 4 things because people don't want to block. They're like, I'm not blocking a death toucher. So you end up going, all right, well, I hit you for combat damage, and now I can just return whatever the best thing is in my graveyard right out to the battlefield. And it's like, hey, you could have easily stopped this value train, but just having that one little keyword on there, it's just it scares people away. It's almost like putting ward on something and people going, "Well, I don't want to target it now."
It's a great defender. It's a great attacker. If that one
Mhm.
damage, it adds up.
But hey, thank you, Donnie Dimes, again for your question. If you guys wanted to leave us a question, hey, YouTube comments are open, DMs are open on all the Instagram, you or Twitter threads, all the platforms. You can also you can actually I just learned if you're listening to this on Spotify, you can actually leave us comments on Spotify as well. So if you want to leave your question of the week that way, obviously if you're listening to us on Spotify and you're like driving or something, maybe pull over first or maybe, wait, but you can reach out that way. We love getting questions and obviously we love answering them or we wouldn't. But Cole, card of the week.
So our card of the week this week is I'm not going to give it too much of a drum roll, but it's Flesh Writher. Now, this is I'm playing on our keyword theme here. This card is the only card in the entire game with the keyword transfigure. Now, transfigure is pretty similar to another keyword, transmute, that allows you to pay the transmute cost of a card, discard it, and search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost as the discarded card. But with the difference is that transfigure is a keyword ability that allows you to search that creature card directly to the battlefield. Now, reading it directly, you're going to see transfigure, sacrifice this creature, search your library for a creature card with the same converted mana cost as this creature, and put that card into play. Then shuffle your library. Play only as a sorcery. This is a 4 mana future sight card, so I'm already a huge fan of kind of the printing style. It's a little bit traditional, but
Yeah.
the
Mana
effect
down the left
itself
side.
is just dangerously strong. Of course, you can go down a combo route and bring out some reanimators, and you could sometimes win the game off of a singular Flesh Writher. But for the most part, it's just a fun way to pull the other 4 drops out of your deck. Maybe a Gonti Lord of Luxury, maybe a Mind Slicer, whatever you really need in the moment. This is a terrifying art, a beautiful card, and a keyword that Mark Rosewater himself said will probably never see the light of day.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys know this, but if you're playing Commander, I mean, 3, 4, and 5 drops are pretty much a bulk of your creatures and stuff in the deck. So getting a 4 drop out is probably going to get you access to one of your just bread and butter cards, if not the absolute win con. I think it's a great pick. I would like to see it pop up more often because I mean they keep making transmute. Why can't they give me a couple more transfigure cards?
Well, I quickly we'll see how strong transfigure is when you're bringing out those absolutely vile combos. I gotta say I understand Mark Rosewater on this one, but it is certainly a great card to plug into your mono black deck and give it a try.
Mhm. Hey guys, but that brings us to the end of the episode. Just a quick reminder, we're going to be at Command Fest Orlando, October 20th through the 22nd, that weekend, but we'll primarily be there Saturday the 21st. If you see us there, hey, come by, say hi. We may or may not, but we will. We'll have some stuff to kind of hand out, some goodies and stuff like that. So challenge us to a game and maybe get some prizes, or if nothing, tell everyone you stomped us into oblivion.
Right on. We're
But
excited
you
to see you
can,
there.
yeah. But in the meantime, if you want to reach out to us, you can find Cole at loveandmana.mtg. You can find me at Sleevecard, or you can reach out to the pod at urcastpod or contact.urcast at gmail.com. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on Spotify, please do take a second to hit that like button, leave a review, hit the bell, the stars, the comments, all that good stuff. It actually does help out quite a bit. And I can tell you that for a fact, because we did get a couple like good reviews off of Spotify for the Lorcana episode, and it directly relates to how often Spotify then shows us to other people that are in the Magic space and stuff like that. So it does help out if you do have 2 seconds to do so. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. But thank you for making it to the end of the episode. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.